dot plot is the next chart for us. Now, dot plot, I think it's actually pretty simple to understand. A couple of good things about a dot plot. We talked about what makes it special. Again, we've been talking about different charts and what makes them special. And you have to understand that when it comes to the GD test, because they could ask you a question based on the data that you see. What would be the best chart to use to display this as a graphic? So you have to understand what makes each chart special so that you know how to choose. Well, this is what I would do. So what makes a dot plot special? What makes a dot plot special is the fact that you get to mess with individual data points. And what I mean by that is I can actually count and grab each single answer. For instance, if I asked people, how many people chose, or actually if I'd said, hey, let's take a look, and what we're going to do is we're going to take everybody's weight. And then I take everybody's weight and I say, okay, I'm gonna take 10 people's weight. And then I have 10 people's weights, and then I can actually take a look at each individual person and see where they fit on the scale. Now, let's go ahead and do that, because sometimes that can be like, I don't really get that, Varen. Okay, let's take a look at it. All right, here we go. So when you look at a dot plot, you can actually sell, they can say, Varen, well, wait a minute, those aren't dots. Okay, so let me start you straight up with a dot plot. So you can take a look at one and say, oh, okay, those look like dots. Okay, so we're on number 2. I want to take a look at that. And I want to go ahead and describe what we see here. So again, can I still do my 3 items? Yes, I can still look and see what's the title. Say, well, the title is hours spent doing homework. Exactly. What are the variables? What's being described? You could say, well, I see 2, 3, 4. That looks like number of people. I'd say exactly. And then you'd say, well, then I see all these individual dots listed here, Baron. And say, okay, that's cool. I'd say, okay, well, what looks high to you? And what looks low? So what looks high? You'd say, well, is it going to be Baron, the one with the most dots? I'd say, yeah, exactly. The one with the most dots is your highest point or your highest quantity. And say, well, that's at 7. Let's say, so it looks like I have the most dots at the number 7 or at 7. I don't, maybe that's hours, Aaron. Let's say, yeah, that's hours. So that's that many people. What is that? How many people is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people at 7 hours. So what's the lowest? Well, you're like, well, Aaron, this seems to be a couple here. Like I see that one at 1. That's 1. That's 1. That's 1. I'd say, yeah, exactly. I'd say, hey, well, what about that one that doesn't have a spot? Would you say that's the lowest spot? Hopefully you say no. It can't be the lowest spot because there's nothing there, and nothing doesn't mean low. We don't really look at it like that. I'd say, well, the lowest data point is the single number 1. I'd say, oh, okay. So we have a highs. I see them. I said many lows, right? Like there's more than one. Can there be more than one? Yeah, there can be more than one. There's no problem with that. Okay, so let's take a look. As you can tell, we just kind of went through and looked at this, but now we're going to talk about dot plot itself. So a dot plot, what it does is, again, it gives me the opportunity to actually look at each individual person or thing. So this is the hours spent doing homework, right? That's what this is, and that's what these represent. So these numbers down here represents the number of hours. So if I said, hey, that's 6 hours, exactly. Now, the dots, what's great about each dot, that is a single person. Or what we call it as a single data point. It is one data point. That is a person. Let's call that one Steve. And as you can see right below him is another data point. That's another person. Call that Lisa. So that's kind of what you're looking at. You're looking at individual data points. You could say they're individual people. And yes, they are. Yes, they are. And if that's true, then what you can do now is you can say, well, it looks like the most people studied for 7 hours. I'd say exactly. So exactly this quantity here, which is the highest, has the highest number of individuals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 people. And you got to remember that's people, not just dots. Those are people. And that's what makes this special, is that it gives you the opportunity to actually break out your data and actually see not just 6, you can see it as a size, right? We can see the 6 is tall. It's taller than everything. That's 6 people. Like, yeah, that's a lot of people. So the question actually is, do you see it? How many students spent 7 hours doing their homework that week? Hey, didn't we also say that, hey, not that was also my high point too, right? This is one of the reasons that we actually do look for high and low when we kind of look at graphs and charts as a first thing, because a lot of times you're going to be asked questions about what is high, what is low, what is the difference between high and low. It happens a lot. So if you already know where to put your eyes, it makes it just that much quicker when you're to answer this question. So again, we already answered this question actually, right? We said, hey, 6 people studied for 7 hours. So we already know that answer. Yep, yep. How awesome was that? Okay, let's do another one. I'm going to move up here because I want to show you something, that first question. And that first question, students sometimes will say, Varon, those don't look like dots. Say, yeah, but it's the same thing. Is that okay? And then they'll say, oh, okay, that's the same thing. So again, I see an X, but you can say an X is just like a dot. It still represents the same thing where it's an individual. This is a single data point. So we have a single data point. So again, you'd look and say, well, what's the highest score in the class? Okay, so now that you kind of know how to look at a chart, at a dot plot, what I want you to do is try answering the question by yourself. What is the highest score in the class? Go ahead and pause the video and answer this. Okay, did you come back yet? Here we go. Now this one can kind of throw people off a little bit. Sometimes people will say, Darren, by looking at the chart, I can see that the score actually goes up to 100%. So the highest score is 100%. I'd say, yeah, no, not really, because that's the highest score that's possible. But that's not what was the highest score that was attained, which means nobody scored that. Because if it was there, I mean, I'd see an X, but I don't see an X. So it means that nobody scored a perfect score on their test. So the question, what is the highest score in the class, means of the people who took the test, not what was the highest score possible on the test, but how did the class do? You'd say, well, it looks like there's some marks here at 98%. I'd say yes. So the highest score was 98%. In fact, it wasn't just one person who did it, it was 2 people. Do you see that? Because there's 2 data points there. It means 2 people made the highest score in class, which is 98%. So no, 100% is not the highest score. 98 was the highest score in the class. Keep practicing.